Welcome to Talk to the Chip, another episode from Resonance FM in Risborough Street. We will be looking at an absolute classic and extremely influential piece of electronic music by Morton Subotnick. His groundbreaking piece, Silver Apples of the Moon. When I say groundbreaking, it's actually, there was so many firsts connected with this composition. It's the first piece of classical music in general, but particularly it's the first piece of electronic music that was commissioned specifically for a vinyl release.
Yeah.
So it's actually composed for the format of vinyl.
Yeah, that's important.
Yeah, that's what it's in two. That's it. Well, it's in two halves: a first half and a second half. One's 17 minutes long, the other one's 15 minutes long.
Yeah.
So it fits exactly into the format of a 12-inch record running at 33.3 revolutions per minute.
The another important aspect will be
the other really important. It's the first album. Not only to be completely composed with, but to actually even to feature a voltage-controlled synthesizer.
Yeah, actually there is like a reference to pitch dimensions, and you mentioned classical, 20th century contemporary composition to be published then on LP, but then use of these tools, and also like a booklet 100 with that non-traditional, no keys synthesizer.
So this is the really early days of synthesizers. So Morton Subotnick is incredibly important for a number of. So not only is it these two completely new things, novel things that he created with this album, with Silver Apples of the Moon, but he was also with Pauline Oliveros set up the San Francisco Tape Center.
Yeah, that's important.
And this was much earlier on. This was 5 or 6 years earlier, and a key player in the electronic music scene on the West Coast, particularly in San Francisco, was Don Buchler. And Don Buchler was a experimental instrument designer and synthesizer builder. And so Don Buchler had created for the San Francisco Tape Center a synthesizer that he called the Buchler 100.
So yeah, to briefly take over to touch upon that, I'd like to quickly mention West Coast and East Coast synthesis for this manner. We maybe for background information, that was a time of, as you said earlier, times for introducing synthesizers. We talked about Wendy Carlos in another context with a different piece, but we had reference to Moog, which was in the East Coast, and then West Coast and East Coast synthesis. These phrases are sometimes mentioned in modular circles.
It's really easily mixed up. So basically,
there's the modular aspect, Buchler, the experimental, we can say.
So essentially, in the early days of synthesizers, what was happening was that voltage control had been discovered. And so you could control aspects of one part of a synthesizer from another. So you could control the pitch of an oscillator. That's the most obvious bit of voltage control.
An amplifier.
Exactly. So you could control the amplifier with a voltage. You could control the filters with a external voltage. And this was very new technology at this point. So on the west coast of the States, basically in San Francisco and in LA, you had people like Don Buchler and Serge Cherepnin, who were developing synthesizers. And on the East Coast, you had Robert Moog.
Yeah.
And the philosophy was quite different, even though they were working in the same area with the same technology. But the major difference, and this is something you hear so much in Silver Apples of the Moon, is that on the East Coast synthesis, the idea was to have your oscillators producing quite complex waveforms, and then you use a filter to make them more simple.
Subtractive synthesis.
And it's subtractive synthesis. So it relies much more on the filters than the original sound generation for the character of the sound. Whereas on the East Coast, on the West Coast, which was Don Buchler and Serge Cherepnin, that the emphasis was on taking quite simple waveforms, but making them much more complex with cross modulation, ring modulation, wave folding.
Wave folding synthesis and low pass gates.
Yes, low pass gates was very much part of the character of it as well. So it was. It started to produce quite different, audibly different aesthetics. And then another aspect came along, which was on the West Coast. They felt that synthesizers were such a liberating thing that there should be no reason why the voltage control should be related to the archaic 16th century idea of a keyboard of equal temperament. So there was many different ways of interfacing with the oscillators, many different ways of generating control voltages rather than just a keyboard playing equal temperament like we were back in the 17th century again. Whereas on the East Coast with Robert Moog, they were the first ones to actually think, wow, we could put a keyboard on these things and we can sell them as instruments. And so they were a massive commercial success.
Yeah.
And it's interesting how those two aesthetics developed, so that Wendy Carlos, with Switched on Bach, was using Moog synthesizers and was working very closely with Moog, basically playing 18th century music on modern equipment with a keyboard, whereas Morton Subotnick, a few years earlier than Switched on Bach, had created this completely atonal, completely new piece of music, new stylistically, completely avant-garde thing with Silver Apples of the Moon.
I mean, the San Francisco State Music Center had that sort of more out of the, I don't want to say like, this is not to compare them to others, like others are lower or anything. These are all different methods. It's just to say the non-institutionalized aspects of San Francisco State Music Center, because other studios that we mentioned, including the ones in Europe, they were either like state supported or connected with like a broadcasting organization, or in the case of the East Coast ones, like Columbia Princeton Electronic Music Center, being more private funding and scholarships, or obviously there's Bell's Laboratories, and that's definitely like a whole thing to respect in terms of computer music and DSP. But when you go to West Coast, in San Francisco State Music Center with Pauline Oliveros and Alvin Luthier, the Sonic Arts group, basically, as they refer to themselves, they were looking after the studio with their own ways, like shifting, sharing shifts, and it was very much like that sort of initiative that kind of facilitated the avant-garde, what we call avant-garde pathway. And then when you think about the way Buchla modular synthesis works, that matches with that kind of approach. And even in today now, it's very revolutionary, on its own right. And it helps with understanding the concepts of synthesis from the point of thinking outside the box. Obviously, I'm not telling you to go and spend $999 truly for a source of uncertainty module, which is one of those Buchla modules.
It's really
and
interesting.
And it's literally $999.
Yeah, it's really fascinating you mentioned that, because that's something I really wanted to talk about in this episode, was because when you know this equipment and you hear Silver Apples of the Moon, you can hear the particular pieces of gear, the particular modules that Subotnick is relying on. And one of the big compositional drives in this whole piece is sample and hold. And sample and hold is
You'll
quite
see it labelled as S and H and
S and H, yes,
in these modules.
Yeah, and it's you see it it's been available for synthesizers right from the very beginning, because it's technically quite simple to generate. But the musical effect is that what you have is a random voltage generator. So you have random pitches or random voltages which can control the filter or the cross modulation or the character of the sound, that are changing on a grid, on a fixed pulse. And this is something really peculiar about Silver Apples of the Moon, is that it's very non-European electronic music because it relies so much on regular rhythms. I mean, the regular pulses that are running through, especially in part 2. I mean, someone like Stockhausen would have been absolutely horrified to have this regular pulse going all the time.
Why? Why do you think he would be horrified?
Because he was. I know, from people who worked with him that if something became regular, he would immediately stop it.
Yeah.
That was. As far as he was concerned, it was against the whole flow of history towards his great expressive concept.
I guess I like that you mentioned that, because for those of you who don't know about it, we don't talk a lot about like what we do. We add these links, but Jono, among the many things that he does, is teaching in Köln University of Tanz und Musik.
I work at the Hochschule of Musik and Tanz in Cologne, which was where Stockhausen worked.
When he says this about Stockhausen, by the way, it's not like the things we are reading, not just that. It's because they literally...
I didn't get it off Reddit.
No, exactly. So it's not from Reddit. It's not from whatever these funny forums.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Just important. I mean, it's very different way of thinking. The way it works is it helps you rewire the way you can create music. In terms of those synthesis methods, when you say like cross modulation and wavefolding, we can talk about the amplitude aspect, how you can create like soft or hard clips or rap unfolding. These are waves that you can manipulate with without merely relying on filters and the patching and the routing of things, giving you these kind of options, communications between these modules. But then if you use also DSP tools like Max MSP, which is not definitely
DSP, just for our listeners, DSP meaning digital sound processing.
Digital signal processing.
Which basically means working in a computer.
Working in a computer, and it is a field that's not just sound, but the reason I wanted to mention Max is one of the when it came out, before it came out, so there is a connection with Bell's Laboratories.
And Laurie Spiegel.
Miller Pocket and David Ciccarelli. I read this when they said a number of objects and numbers communicating through meaningless messages. Yeah. So it's that kind of a platform where you design patches and communications. And in a way, when we think back about Buchla, that is not meaningless messages. Meaningless messages, there is like, of course, a fun reference, but here is very much like because of the voltage control and electrics process, it has to be very clear. But this is, in a way, the beginning of going outside the box. And I'm happy you mentioned, like, why should we design it with, like, keyboards necessarily? That is helpful. We have MIDI controllers now for things, although they also have knobs. But that's the idea. And everything, even in the digital version, like the tools like VCV Rack, or recently I've found out about more like a Linux or more independent one called Cardinal. These tools are still using the same Buchla terminology. So Subotnick's pieces, I think, good to mention, to refer to all of these current developments, because VCV, voltage controlled, like VCO, VCF, it is a tool in the computer, but it's still using voltage controls in the terminology.
Yeah. Well, this is the important thing, is there's the difference between the technology and the ideas behind them. So it's the ideas that Buchla had are much more important, and they're being implemented by different technology now.
Yeah.
But it's the idea, it's the ideas that were important.
Yeah.
And I think this one piece of equipment he made, the source of uncertainty, is a really nice thing. So he had this, of course, producing random voltages is a very important part of the compositional technique, and we hear it a lot in Silver Apples. And white noise, which is one of the most important basic signals that are used in electronic music, is effectively a random waveform. It's when all the pitches are all happening at the same time, so it's leaping around all over the place. But it shows a lot about Don Buchla's character, that his random signal and random voltage generator, he didn't just call it the random module, he called it the source of uncertainty. And it's such a complicated way of doing things in a way that leaves much more creativity in there. And that's the really special thing. That's the real special contribution of the artists and the technicians of this period. And it is amazing that the kind of groundwork that they set then, we are using exactly the same things today,
Yeah.
And it's interesting that, that I've just finished, literally last week, a translation of a book about modular synthesizers and the whole history of modular synthesizers.
Oh, wow.
And it's fascinating for me that it's such a fashionable thing from the last 10, 20 years has become really, really fashionable again. But the first synthesizers were modular. So that the first Moog systems were modular systems.
Yeah.
The first Buchla systems were modular. It's like that the whole concept of how we synthesize things, of synthetic music, is essentially a modular thing.
Yeah, with the matrices and rotings.
Yeah, but they became this idea of a single instrument with a bunch of incomprehensible knobs on it and a keyboard, in response to Moog putting keyboards on the synths in the East Coast style in the late 60s and the Mini Moog, because all of a sudden synthesizers weren't the kind of synthesis
affordable and portable.
Well, it wasn't just they became affordable, but it also meant that people with traditional sets of skills could play the synthesizer. So you get people like, I don't know, imagine like the keyboard player in a band like Genesis would be playing like major scales on the synths, whereas 5 years earlier with Morton Subotnick, it was using random voltages and playing with the sound itself, rather than going up and down a major scale. In a progressive rock band,
Maybe he wanted to do that. No, I mean, it's a funny joke. Exactly. I mean, he witnessed how Buchla was building it in a way. Like he was not like involved in the design, but he had the perspective about the whole idea of how it was developed. And he says in one of those interviews, which I will link, he says he was about the Buchla synthesizer and how he was convinced to compose this by using that, among others. He was building it according to my design. I was trying to picture what I would need to create, the kind of electronic music that I would want to do. What I had when he got finished was what I had dreamed of it being. So it was sort of the other way around. I dreamed it, and he designed it and built it. So apparently
super creative relationship. Yeah, absolutely brilliant. But the piece itself, it's interesting that, just listening to how we're talking about it, we're talking about this extremely avant-garde piece with completely new sounds that eschews the whole diatonic system of music and into a new world. But it was a real success. The album's
popular aspect.
That's it. The albums,
groovy,
the albums,
driven things.
That's it. The album sold really, really well, and it puts Subotnick on the map. It puts electronic music on the map. It was a firm favourite with bands like the Grateful Dead, and of course Zappa was into it. It was amazing how popular it had become. And it's strange that just a few years later, it was completely overshadowed by Wendy Carlos playing Bach on these instruments.
Oh.
Which is like kind of...
Was that? Oh, it was, yeah.
Yeah. So it was only 2 years later that Switched On Bach appeared, which was kind of doing the opposite, which was taking the new technology and doing something very, very old with it.
Yeah.
And in a way, we're only just recovering from that. That synthesizers now, that people who make music with synthesizers, even in the popular sphere, are much, much more influenced by silver apples and the idea of random pitches to a groovy grid than they are of playing the melodies and playing polyphonic melodies from Bach compositions on a synth.
I guess it's important to note down like how the institution and how all the parties involved in that sort of thing. When I think also important, definitely. That's why like we did cover like a piece from Juan Carlos in an episode, which is not like we try to unearth it by respecting the seclusion that's wanted with sonic seasonings. That was before Moog, and it involved tapes, etc. But like the reason I'm mentioning it is like when we watch these archival videos. There is one, I forgot the synthesizer's name now. I will add it in the links. But when the Carlos showing like sound design 101, you see that aspect of her building xylophone and the way she does it, like one by one, step by step, showing it by playing the notes and adjusting the
levels of the harmonics.
Exactly. That shows like, these composers, they all had that sort of perspective of like approaching sound in a way, like obviously like all the articulations, the dynamics of classical music or traditionally written scores, they would be influencing their decisions maybe, but the idea is to take all those parameters of sound and then building that kind of, whatever you call it, a patch, a system, designing the sound in a way. So, but then the commercial aspect, when you look into it, that is that's definitely can have years and years of influence, as you say. But then we also have a lot of people, like a bunch of men, or like I'm not like just looping, sequencing the sounds. It is one method to approach it. Yeah. It's fun. It's still like, there is that part of modules that I see. I mean, we did talk about like Tangerine Dream and the beautiful balanced school of sequences. These are all things to appreciate. But on the other hand, I'd say like a lot of in the modular synthesis world, it's a whole different world. I think none of them are free from these key events.
Yes, it's so much. There's so much you can do with this equipment, but still, the music that people make with it is using equal temperaments, and it's almost all of it in 4/4.
Yeah, that's true. I understand.
Same rhythm.
I'm definitely recognizing. Like, I would probably be the last person to. Like, I mean, that's why like some circles are not liking what I do maybe, or what I talk about, because they just want to go with the 4-bar loops, or they just want to go with the usual, like, we already have too much of it. We go to radio, it's there, it's in the mainstream. Like, why would you sign up for example, studying electronic music?
One of the weird things for me is that, of course, I was involved in the early days of the development of rave music.
Yeah, you're a pioneer in that sense.
Well, yeah. I mean, I was sitting in the studio as an engineer and programmer. We were releasing like 5 or 6 tracks a week. I was doing an enormous amount of quite anonymous rave tunes, which became techno, which became house music, all that stuff.
It's amazing.
Which then became drum and bass, and all of that stuff was all related. And the thing is that those conventions were put in place quite early, let's say between 89 and 94, and haven't changed since.
Yeah.
It's absolutely amazing for me now, having young DJs getting in touch with me, looking for tracks that I worked on 30 years ago.
In a way.
And they're saying, and it's like, I often put myself in their position and say, if I'd asked my father for a piece of music from 1963 in 1993, or even worse, from 1953, it seemed impossible to us at that time.
So when you mentioned, by the way, the popularity of the first, like I did an extra note because that's something we always want to, give the credits. But I've just also, wanted to share this response in this interview with Morton Subotnick about the subject. Mm-hmm. He was being asked about, so to support what you said in a way, about like he was surprised by what the hell? How did it go so popular? They weren't expecting it because it's something connected with again with the MOOC party. So he was asked, were you surprised at all when you saw all the popularity it got after it became such a hit? And it is also referred to as paving the way for things like when the Carlos switched on Bach. And then he says, I was completely dumbfounded, as was everybody else. I got a certain amount of money from my publisher at the time for my instrumental music. They gave what was called an advance on royalties, but you never were going to make enough to ever pay back. I don't know, I got $400 a month or $500 a month. He says these are like the times are different, so currencies might be a bit, numbers might not make sense. And he continues, it wasn't much, but it was something, and they were doing it to help keep me alive. Then they could pay for copying and things like that, so they didn't have enough of the first LP. So when you did a recording, which they never expected to sell more than 200 records at the most, that was a big sale. In a year, the record company would take 50% of your royalties. At first, they were taking 50% of not very much of money, almost no money. When Silver Apples came out, it sold over more than 10,000 copies that first year. He continued, it was such a discrepancy that I went to the lawyer of the publisher and I said, this isn't what I was meant by your taking 50%.
Yeah.
And he agreed and changed the conditions of the royalty split. So that's how surprising it was for him. Yeah. Well, I'm glad Morton got paid, because there's lots of other composers who've never sorted out their finances. This 50% thing is still the continuation of that. Those things are still going on.
Yeah.
I mean, people are not even selling physical copies easily.
All sorts of sharp practice going on. Well, but that's another can of worms. One thing is that it's the original piece composed for the vinyl format has been re-released a number of times, but the most recent release is on a label called Carl Records from Berlin, and this is run by a great guy called Thomas Herbst. I released a CD with Thomas and Philippe Petit, who runs the Modularism regular website and radio show, and we released this piece based on one of Mahler's symphonies called Off to Titan, and
Carl Records.
And Thomas has kept Carl Records going for almost 20 years now, and it's a fantastic label. They've released original Xenakis material.
Very good.
Really good stuff.
I checked out their Bandcamp when I was looking for this to see if I could get a copy. It's sold out, of course.
Yeah.
So,
and what's particularly nice about this is that they've re-released Silver Apples of the Moon on vinyl as it was intended and newly remastered, and the remaster sounds absolutely excellent. It's really so you really hear the quality of those proper original Buchla synths, and
that sounds very difficult to reproduce.
Well, it's literally just taking the original master tapes and just getting a really nice clean transfer for the master, because of course there's always problems with when things were remastered for CD. They became very bright and very thin, and there was all sorts of digital issues.
16-bit
all
bit
sorts of
rates.
aliasing and all sorts of issues would occur. But this is a really nice release.
So I'm guessing that was like in limited copies. Do you know if they are planning to re-release it? This like they re-released it in 2014.
But I'm sure Thomas would be happy to to tell us. What's
Hello,
going on.
Thomas.
Yes.
If you hear us, I mean, this is a message from Jono to you.
Yeah. Good. So, yes, thanks for listening. And everything we referred to, including the Carl Records release, we'll put links with the podcast so you'll be able to listen to the track. And enjoy Silver Apples of the Moon like so many people have since over the last 40 years.
10,000 copies, yeah. There have been definitely 10,000 people who enjoyed it.
Oh, many, many more by now. Well, actually, I said 40 years. It's 50 years.
Yeah, that's 50 years.
Yes,
Yeah.
it's been around 50 years. Fabulous piece of music.
Yeah, I think we should label this also with some Don Buchler label, like.
Well, Don Buchler, of course, when we covered Suzanne Ciani, Don Buchler was a massive influence on her music, and she was his assistant for a while.
Yeah, those are...
When she was living in Berkeley and not wearing any shoes, as I remember.
Okay, I think you said that in the previous one also. Right, thank you for listening. See you in the next one.
Thank you for listening.